I spent the morning looking for a 10-year-old's missing dress shoe, and the afternoon driving a glitter-covered solar system model across Columbus because Noah had left it by the mudroom bench again. By 7 o'clock that night, my son was raising a champagne glass in a private room at Marcella's and acting like I'd drifted in off the street. The first wrong thing was my place card. Not the name on it. The place. They'd set me near the end of the long table down by Elise's aunt from Dayton and her husband, who wore hearing aids and kept asking the waiter for more breadsticks. Family was supposed to be in the middle. Daniel and Elise at one end, her parents close by the kids across from them for the early part of the dinner before somebody took them home. That was how those things usually went. But my card was off to the side, tucked beside the wall sconces and the fake olive tree like I was close enough to count and far enough not to matter. I stood there with my jacket over one arm and looked at it a second too long. Elise said they had to squeeze us in. Daniel told me, checking his phone without really checking my face. Big party tonight. Sure, I said. That was the thing about getting older. You got good at hearing what people meant to smooth over and what they meant to hide. I had lived long enough to know the difference, and lonely enough these past 4 years to pretend sometimes that I didn't. The private room smelled like lemon-polished red sauce and warm bread. Somebody had already lit the little glass candle holders, though the sun was still hanging on outside. Through the half-open door, I could hear plates clattering in the main dining room and one of the hostesses laughing too loud at something. It was early spring, damp and gray all day, and people had come in carrying that wet Ohio chill on their coats. My navy blazer still had a fleck of silver glitter on the cuff from Lucy's project board, and I rubbed at it with my thumb while Daniel stepped away to answer a call. I had been up since 6. Packed 2 lunches because Elise had an early salon appointment, scrambled eggs for the kids, signed 1 field trip form, drove Noah's project to school after he forgot it, picked up Daniel's anniversary cake from the bakery on Lane Avenue because the lettering needed fixing, stopped at Kroger for the fancy sparkling water Elise liked when company was over, replaced the batteries in the hallway thermostat because the screen had gone blank again. None of it was a hardship. That was just what the day had asked for, and I had been the one there to answer it. When June was alive, she used to say I was the kind of man people got used to leaning on because I never made a sound about the weight. She did not say it mean. Mostly she said it with one eyebrow up over her coffee mug, like she was trying to decide whether it was one of my better qualities or one that would come back and bite me. Sometimes after she died, I would hear her voice in the kitchen before I remembered the kitchen was mine alone. That had been 4 years ago, and the house on Beechcroft had felt too quiet afterward, too full of chair legs and lampshades and the shape of her not there. Daniel had said, "Come stay with us a while, Dad. No reason for you to sit in that place by yourself." At the time it had sounded like kindness, and maybe it had been. I sold the house the next spring, moved into the finished room over the garage with my old bureau, the leather chair June hated, and one framed picture of her at 62 standing in the yard with pruning shears in one hand, and a look on her face like the hydrangeas had personally offended her. A while had turned into 3 years. Elise came in carrying a cake knife wrapped in a white napkin. She looked good, I'll give her that. Navy dress, pearl earrings, hair pinned back in that careful way that looked loose only because somebody had spent money making it look that way. "Oh, good. You made it," she said, and kissed the air near my cheek. Did Daniel remember to bring the folder from the car? "What folder?" She blinked. "Never mind. Probably business. You know how he is." Then she smiled at 2 people behind me before I could answer, and the smile moved right off my face and onto theirs. Elise had a way of doing that, making you feel attended to for half a second, then managed. The kids came in next Noah in a button-down shirt, already untucked Lucy with a cardigan slipping off one shoulder. Maggie trailed behind them at 14, all elbows and quiet eyes, her dark hair pulled into a low ponytail. She came straight to me. "Did Mrs. Kenner say anything about the project?" she asked. She said Noah would have cried if it didn't make it there by 9. Noah, already reaching for bread, said I would not have cried. "You absolutely would have." Maggie said, then smiled at me a little. She knew. She noticed things. Daniel came back in, slid his phone into his pocket, and clapped once, like he was gathering a meeting to order. "All right," Let's do this. He looked good too. Grey suit, white shirt, new watch Elise had probably bought him. He had gotten broader through the shoulders in his 40s and carried himself now with that forward-moving energy men get when they believe a lot depends on them. When he was a boy, he used to look back over his shoulder to make sure I was still there. These days, he mostly looked ahead. Guests filled in. Elise's parents, her sister and brother-in-law, 2 couples from church, a banker Daniel knew, an old college friend, her aunt and uncle down by me. The waiter came around with wine lists, and the children's menus disappeared after 10 minutes because the kids were leaving after the main course. At some point, Daniel sat and stood 3 different times without ever really settling. He kept checking his watch. Elise kept smoothing the edge of the tablecloth near her plate. I saw then that the silverware by Daniel's setting had been rearranged twice. Little signs, tiny pressure leaks. When the appetizers came, Daniel leaned past me to ask his father-in-law about interest rates and warehouse space, then leaned the other way to talk to the banker about expansion. I listened to them discuss square footage and trucking lanes while I cut Lucy's chicken into smaller pieces because she was too busy telling me about a girl at school who had lied about being allergic to homework. Elise said you got the cake fixed, her mother said to me. I did. Well, that's good. That was the whole conversation. There are 100 little ways a man can disappear in a room without ever leaving it. A younger person might not know that yet. At 71, you feel each one. I told myself not to be foolish. It was a busy night. Daniel was hosting. People were scattered. Maybe the seat cards had been a restaurant mix-up. Maybe the room just had a funny shape. Maybe I was tired from the day. That was the old habit in me explaining away the first bruise before the second one landed. By the time the plates were cleared, Noah was yawning, and Lucy had marinara on one cuff. Elise's sister took the kids home, and Maggie asked if she could stay a little longer. Just keep your phone on, Elise told her. The room got quieter after that. More adult, more polished. The waiter poured another round. Somebody dimmed the lights a touch, and the little glass candles started throwing soft gold across the table. Daniel stood up with his wine glass and tapped it lightly with a fork. He started well enough. Talked about 15 years with Elise, their first apartment with the bad pipes, the second baby coming 2 weeks early, the year the business almost broke him, how Elise had stood by him, how her parents had always believed in them. He thanked his team, thanked his church friends, thanked the banker, thanked one of Elise's cousins for helping during a move 8 years ago. People laughed in the right places. Elise put a hand over her heart once. I sat there with my own water glass and waited for the smallest thing. Not a speech, just a line, just an ordinary one. Thanks to Dad for helping with the kids. Thanks to Dad for being there. Thanks to Dad for today. Nothing came. Maggie looked down at her lap. She had started twisting the string bracelet on her wrist. Daniel lifted his glass higher. And most of all, he said to the people who know how to carry their own weight and still show up for family. That matters more the older you get. A few people murmured and raised their glasses. I felt that one go by me like a cold draft under a door. When the cake was cut and plates were being passed, I leaned toward Daniel while he sat back down. Listen, I said quietly. I can head out after dessert. Let you all have the rest of the evening. No need for me to take up a chair. He had already been drinking some not sloppy, but warm-faced and loose in the jaw. He turned to me too fast, and maybe, if it had just been the two of us, he would have let the sentence die before it reached the air. Instead, he said it with half the table listening. Well, you've been eating off us long enough, Dad. Might as well stay for cake. Nobody moved, not right away. You could hear the main dining room outside the door. A server dropped something metallic, and somebody laughed out there far away and normal. In our room, Elise's hand stopped on the cake server. Her mother stared at the candle by the butter dish. Maggie looked straight at me now, not confused, just old enough to know exactly what she had heard. Daniel gave a short breath through his nose like he had only said something a little too honest. Not cruel. I'm kidding, he added, but he said it to the table, not to me. I looked at him and saw all at once how easy that line had come out. Not invented, not accidental, ready. I set my fork down on the dessert plate. My hand was steady, which surprised me. For one ugly second, I thought of June standing at our old kitchen sink, turning to look at me over her shoulder and saying, "Don't let people make a servant out of your love, Walt." Then there was a soft voice at my right shoulder. "Excuse me, sir," the waiter said. "Are you Mr. Walter Mercer?" Daniel reached before I could answer. The waiter didn't look at him. He held a thick tabbed folder in both hands and said very politely, "I was told this goes directly to Mr. Walter Mercer." I took the folder because there was nothing else to do with my hands. It was heavier than it looked, the kind with a stiff blue cover and white tabs cut along the side. My name was typed on a label across the front in black block letters. Walter Mercer. Not Dad. Not Walter M. Mercer. Not some casual note from the bakery or a school office. The sort of thing lawyers and bank people send when they need the right person, not just any person close by. Daniel's hand hung in the air for half a second before he pulled it back. "There must be some mistake," he said, and laughed once too quick. "That's probably mine." The waiter stayed polite. "I was told to place it directly with Mr. Mercer, sir." I could still feel the heat from what Daniel had said a moment before. Funny how the body keeps score of a thing even when the mind is still trying to explain it away. My ears had gone hot. My chest felt hollow and crowded at the same time. Across the table, Maggie had stopped touching her bracelet. I slid a thumb beneath the flap and opened the folder. The first page was a cover memo on letterhead from Keller Briggs Advisory. Beneath that was a due diligence summary, then a list of attachments, then a page with my name. Again, this time in the middle of a paragraph. Company viability during first quarter stabilization period materially supported by temporary guarantor intervention and supplier bridge assurances arranged by Walter Mercer. I read that line twice. The room had not moved, but it had shifted. You could tell by the silence. It was no longer the silence after a bad joke. It was the silence people fall into when something official has entered the room, and nobody yet knows who it belongs to. Daniel leaned toward me, low-voiced now. "Dad, let me see that." I didn't hand it over. Not out of drama. My fingers just didn't loosen. My eyes moved down the page. Dates. Account references. A short description of a payroll exposure window. Vendor extension terms. One line about emergency personal liquidity contribution. It was all there in that dry, bloodless language business people use when they are talking about panic after it is safely over. I knew every line without needing to read it. I was back in February, 2 years earlier, standing in Daniel's warehouse on a Saturday morning with my coat still on because the heat was struggling and one of the bay doors didn't seal right. He had looked gray around the mouth that day. His office smelled like stale coffee and cardboard dust. He kept saying it was a cash flow pinch, nothing more, just a timing issue. Payroll on Tuesday, receivables coming Thursday, one client dragging their feet, no reason to overreact. Then he had taken his glasses off and rubbed his eyes the way he used to when he was 10 and trying not to cry over math homework. "Dad," he'd said, not looking at me, "I'm gonna get through it. I just need a little room." A little room. That was how men ask when they are already ashamed. They shrink the thing in their mouth before they set it in front of you. I remembered the cracked black vinyl on the chair in his office. The whiteboard calendar with 3 client names circled in red. The way the warehouse sounded too empty for a company that was supposed to be growing. I remembered saying nothing for a good while, because I knew if I spoke too fast, he would hear concern as judgment. At home, that night, my room over the garage, not really home. And not home either. I sat on the edge of the bed with June's old cedar jewelry box in my lap. I kept a few things of hers there because the smell lasted longer in the wood than it did anywhere else. Not jewelry anymore. Papers. A note she'd written me once from the hospital cafeteria when her sister was sick. A church bulletin folded around a pressed maple leaf. The title to the base boat I had bought after retirement and only used 6 summers. June had hated that boat less than she claimed. She'd roll her eyes whenever I cleaned it like it was a second marriage, but she came with me often enough. Sat in the back with a paperback and a thermos and her sneakers up on the cooler. After she got sick the last time, she asked me out of nowhere what I planned to do with it. "Fish," I told her. "No," she said. After. She was lying in that hospital bed with no lipstick on and still somehow managing to look like the only adult in the room. You always think being useful will keep everybody honest, she said. It doesn't. Sometimes it just teaches people what they can ask for next. I had told her she was being hard on folks. She looked at me a long time. I'm being accurate. 3 days after Daniel talked to me in the warehouse, I sold the boat to a man out in Hilliard who showed up in work boots with cash and a trailer hitch that sat too low. I watched him drive it away in sleet. The taillights disappeared at the corner, and I stood in the driveway with my hands in my coat pockets, feeling foolish for being as sad as I was over aluminum and an outboard motor. But it wasn't the boat, not really. It was the shape of the life June and I had meant to have. I turned another page. There was the guarantee. My signature at the bottom dated and witnessed. Walter E. Mercer. The old steady way I still signed things, same as when I signed mortgage papers on Beechcroft in 1983. Same as when I signed the cremation authorization for my wife and the funeral director handed me the pen without meeting my eyes for too long. My throat tightened. I could feel Daniel watching me now. Not like a son watching a father, but like a man watching a door he thought was locked start to swing open on its own. It was temporary, he said. That was just bridging some paperwork. Nobody answered him. Elise's face had changed. Not collapsed. She was too practiced for that, but the social smile had left it. Her fingers were flat against the tablecloth, holding it still. She knew enough to know this folder wasn't random. I kept reading. There were notes from suppliers, I had called myself, men I'd known 20, 30 years. One from a packaging distributor in Akron who extended terms on my word alone. One from an old purchasing manager in Dayton who agreed not to call a balance due if the company could show movement inside 14 days. One sentence from an advisory memo that said, in effect, relationships predating current management materially affected survival outcome. Current management. That was Daniel boiled down into a phrase. And there I was, too reduced to guarantor intervention, emergency liquidity. Supplier, bridge assurances. Strange thing was, I preferred that dry language in that moment. It didn't flatter me, didn't call me generous or noble. It just refused to lie. The lie was at the table. I thought then of all the small things that had seemed easier not to name over the years. The way Daniel would say, "Can you grab the kids?" instead of, "Can you help us out?" because helping had become assumed. The way Elise once told a neighbor within earshot of me, "It's nice having him around like I was a ladder they stored in the garage." The Times school secretaries called me first because I was the dependable one, though at dinner, Daniel still spoke as if his own hands held every beam in the house. The way my room over the garage slowly filled up with their overflow old soccer gear, Christmas bins, a treadmill nobody used until I had to step around the family's extras to get to my own dresser. I had called all of that ordinary. I had called it family. Because the alternative was admitting I had traded my old house, my quiet, my routines, and some piece of my self-respect for the privilege of being nearby. That was the part that cost, not the money, not the boat, not the signatures. It cost to see all at once how much of my silence had not been grace, but fear. Fear of being one more old man in a little condo microwaving soup for one. Fear that if I named what I gave, they'd decide I was too much trouble to keep near. Fear that June had been right. A shadow fell across the table, and a man in a charcoal suit stood beside the waiter. Mid-50s, maybe. Thin silver frames, leather folio under one arm. He had the look of a person who spent his days turning tense rooms into signed rooms. "Mr. Mercer," he said. I looked up. Martin Keller. "I'm sorry to interrupt your evening." He glanced around, then finally noticing the air in the room. "I was running behind from Dublin. I wanted to make sure that memo reached you before Monday." Daniel pushed his chair back a fraction. "Martin, right? You could have just sent that to me." Martin gave him a professional nod, the kind that acknowledges a man without rearranging itself for him. "I sent the operating package to your office this afternoon. This file needed Mr. Mercer's review because the acquisition committee had questions about the 2024 stabilization period." Nobody at the table touched a fork. Martin looked back at me. "I also wanted to thank you personally. Frankly, without your intervention, then this company likely doesn't survive long enough to be in this conversation now." There it was. Not from me. Not from memory. Not from family. From a man who didn't care who got his feelings hurt as long as the record was clean. Elise shut her eyes for 1 second and opened them again. Maggie was staring openly now, first at me, then at her father, as if she were trying to fit two versions of a man into one face. Daniel gave a little shrug that made me angrier than the insult had. That's overstating it. Martin didn't argue. He just tapped the open page with one finger. It's the committee's wording. They based it on the guarantee, the supplier extensions, and the emergency capital injection. Emergency capital injection. That was my boat. My old fishing money. My quiet. My wife's after. And across from me sat my son with candlelight on his glass, an anniversary cake on his plate, trying to flatten it into nothing while the room still held the sound of freeloader in the air. Something went still inside me then. Not dead still. Clear still. I saw plain as daylight that this was not one ugly line from a tired man with too much to drink. The line had roots. It had been growing under the floorboards for years, fed by every chore left unnamed, every thanks left unsaid, every time I'd chosen peace over proportion. Daniel had not simply forgotten what I was to him. He had resized it, made me small enough to stand over. June's voice came back to me not soft this time. Accurate. I turned. One more page, saw my own signature again, and then closed the folder. The sound it made on the white tablecloth was small, but in that room it felt like something being set down for the last time. I didn't stand up. I didn't leave. For the first time all night, I knew I wasn't going to. For a second nobody spoke, and I understood something I should have understood years earlier. Silence doesn't always mean respect. Sometimes it just means the truth has walked into the room and everybody's waiting to see who it belongs to. Martin cleared his throat softly. I don't want to intrude on a family event, he said. And he meant it, Mr. Mercer. If you have any questions after you review the committee notes, call me tomorrow. I nodded once. Thank you. He gave the room one more careful glance, then stepped back. The waiter followed him out and closed the door behind them. The sounds from the main dining room came back in a muffled way. Silverware, laughter, somebody calling for another bottle of Barbera. But our table stayed still. Daniel reached for his water and missed the stem of the glass the first time. Everybody can calm down, he said. This is getting turned into something bigger than it was. I looked at him across the candles. Bigger than what? He gave a little shrug, the same one. A comment, a rough joke. Jesus, Dad. That was when Elise finally looked at him. Not at me, and I saw something in her face I had not seen before. Not courage, exactly. More like the point where embarrassment can't quite keep pretending to be composure. It wasn't a joke, Maggie said. Nobody had asked her, and because nobody had the words landed harder, Daniel turned. Maggie. She didn't lower her eyes. She had her mother's mouth and my son's dark hair, but in that moment there was something of June in the way she held a room still by refusing to help it lie to itself. You weren't joking, she said again, quieter this time. You say stuff like that. Elise drew in a breath. Maggie, enough. No, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Maybe that was the first surprise of the night to everybody but me. When a man spends long enough not using his authority, people forget he still has one. Maggie looked at me, then down at her folded napkin. Daniel gave a short laugh that had no ease in it. So now I'm on trial because Dad helped out 2 years ago. I put my hand on the folder. No, I said. You're on trial because 10 minutes ago you called me a freeloader in a room full of people after I spent the day helping your family run on time. His mouth tightened. I didn't call you a... You did. That stopped him. You learn over a lifetime that some words belong to opinion and some belong to fact. He could argue tone, intent, stress, misunderstanding, but he could not argue the sentence itself. It was sitting there between us, plain as a plate. I opened the folder again, not because I needed the pages anymore, but because I wanted my hands on something steady. I got Noah's school project to Ridgeview before first period this morning, I said. I picked up your cake on Lane. I stopped for Elise's sparkling water. I changed the thermostat batteries because the hallway screen went blank again. Last week I took Lucy to urgent care when she woke up with that earache. 2 Thursdays ago, I sat in the orthodontist waiting room with Maggie because Elise had that lunch downtown and you were in Cincinnati. That's not the point, Daniel said. It is exactly the point. I kept my eyes on him. I was surprised by how calm I felt. Not numb, not cold, just clean. Like one hard rain had finally washed the dust off something, and there it was, underneath the shape of it. I never minded doing any of that, I said. I'm her grandfather. I'm your father. Houses need things. Children need rides. People help each other. But you don't get to use the life I've been holding up around you and then call me a man who eats off you. The aunt from Dayton shifted in her chair. Elise's father stared at the tablecloth. Her mother had tears standing in her eyes now, though whether from pity or shame or just discomfort, I couldn't have said. Daniel leaned back. You live in my house. There it was. Smaller than the first insult maybe, but older. Truer. The root under it. I nodded. I live in the room over your garage. He opened his hands. Exactly. No, I said. Not exactly. I laid 2 fingers on the open page and slid the folder an inch toward the middle of the table, enough for the gesture to register. Exactly is this. 2 years ago, your company was close enough to folding that men in suits now put the word viability in a file and attach my name to it. Exactly is the boat I sold because you needed payroll. Exactly is the calls I made to people who still trusted my word before they trusted your balance sheet. Exactly is my signature on that guarantee. When you didn't have enough room left to get your own breath back, Daniel's face had gone red high on the cheeks. I paid that back. I know you did. That one hit him funny. He had expected accusation and found none. I was not there to say he had stolen from me. That would have made things easier for him. Easier to answer. Easier to fight. This isn't about whether you paid it back, I said. It's about what you made it mean afterward. Elise closed her eyes briefly, the way people do when they know the next sentence is coming, whether they want it or not. When your mother died, I said, and my own voice changed on that. Not weaker. Older. I came to your house because I thought being near family was better than sitting alone with a quiet I didn't know how to live in yet. I told myself I was helping and being helped. Fair enough, that's what families do. I looked at the candle nearest my plate. The melted wax bowed to one side. But somewhere along the way, helping turned into being counted like part of the furniture. Useful while I worked. Expensive once I had feelings. Convenient when I drove fixed-fetched, weighted covered. A burden the minute I might need my place, named honestly. Nobody interrupted. Even Daniel didn't. That hurt more than if he had. Because if he'd cut in angry, there would still have been some boy in him I recognized. This was a man listening to the shape of himself and not liking it. Maggie's voice came from down the table, small but clear. Grandpa makes my lunches when Mom has the early salon days. Elise turned to her. Honey. And he stayed up when Noah had that asthma thing, Maggie said. And he came to my choir concert when you had the client dinner. Daniel looked at his daughter like he had forgotten she had been in the room all evening. Elise set her napkin down. The movement was very careful. Walter, she said, and her voice trembled once before she steadied it. You have done more than we say. That's true. It was not a grand confession, not a speech, but it was enough. Enough because she was the one who handled calendars and logistics, the one who knew exactly how much of family life I'd been carrying with both hands. If she said it aloud, the rest of the lie had nowhere decent left to stand. Daniel looked at her as if she had stepped away from him in public. I thought then of June at our kitchen table, reading bills with her glasses low on her nose, telling me not every kind of peace was worth keeping. I had argued with her then. Told her a house stayed warm because somebody chose not to make a fire over every hurt feeling. She had shaken her head. No, Walt. A house stays warm because people don't keep throwing cold things into it. I let out one breath and felt for the first time all night like I was not swallowing anything with it. I'm not staying over the garage, I said. That landed harder than the folder had. Elise's hand went to her throat. Daniel stared at me. Dad, don't be dramatic. There's nothing dramatic about it. I'll be out by the weekend. Where are you gonna go? There was irritation in the question, but under that something smaller. Not grief. Not yet. Maybe inconvenience. Maybe disbelief that a man he had recoded as permanent might act like he still had agency. "I'll figure it out," I said. "I'm 71, Daniel. I can rent a place and boil an egg." A sound escaped Maggie, then half laugh and half sob, and she covered her mouth. I stood up. My knees complained some, but less than they had last winter. Funny what clarity can do for a man's posture. "I won't make a scene," I said. "You already did that for me." Daniel opened his mouth, but whatever he had planned to say seemed to die somewhere between pride and shame. So I picked up the folder, set my napkin beside the cake plate, and left him there with his anniversary candles and his witnesses and the remains of a story that had held as long as I agreed to stay small inside it. 3 days later, I was in a furnished apartment over a retired barber's garage in Upper Arlington. 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen with yellow curtains somebody's late sister had sewn sometime in the 90s. The place smelled faintly of coffee grounds and radiator heat. It wasn't much, but it was mine in a way the room over Daniel's garage had never been. Maggie came by once with a paper bag of things I'd forgotten. A flannel shirt, my church bulletin, a bottle of aspirin, and the little construction paper centerpiece she had made for the anniversary table, blue cardstock with silver stars glued crooked around the bottom. "I made 2, she said, standing awkward in the doorway. "One was supposed to go by your plate, but Mom put it with the extra stuff." I took it from her carefully. "Thank you, sweetheart." She looked at the kitchen behind me. "You okay?" I could have lied. Old men get very good at that too. "Fine. Hanging in there, taking it day by day." Instead, I said more than I was. She nodded like that made sense, and then she hugged me quick and hard before heading back down the stairs. The next morning, I got up before sunrise out of habit. Put water on for coffee in a dented little percolator the barber's widow had left in the cabinet. The apartment was quiet except for the tick of baseboard heat and one early truck out on the street. A pale line of April light had started behind the houses across the alley. I set Maggie's centerpiece by the window over the sink. Then I took the 1 page from the acquisition folder, the page with my name in the middle of that dry official paragraph, and laid it beside the paper stars. Morning light touched both of them at once. The stiff white page and the crooked blue construction paper. Proof and love. Record and child's hand. One telling me what I had done. The other telling me who had still seen it. I stood there with my coffee warming my palm and thought about June, about the boat lights disappearing in sleet, about Beechcroft, about that long table and Daniel's face when the room stopped helping him lie. I did not feel victorious. Life is too old and too human for that, but I felt settled in a way I had not for years. I understood then that being needed had kept me in that house, but it was not the same thing as being cherished. One can look enough like the other to fool a man for a long time, especially after grief. Especially if he wants so badly to stay near the people he loves that he starts accepting smaller and smaller definitions of himself. The coffee hissed once in the pot behind me. Outside, the light came up a little more, laying itself across the window glass. The paper stars, my hand on the counter. And for the first time since June died, I did not mistake the quiet for emptiness.